Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the potpourri portion of this episode of Eurodollar University with Jeff Snyder, the head of global research for Alhambra Partners, and me, Emil Kalinowski. We're also known as the Buffalo Bills fan and the New England Patriots fan of the American Football Leagues. And guess what? One of those teams beat the other team. Which team? It's not important. But
certainly you don't want to get into that.
We're going to be talking. I bring it up because that's how Jeff opened up an article over at Real Clear Markets. The title of the article is "The PBOC is doing the opposite of the Federal Reserve," and it was posted on the 21st of January, 2022.
PBOC, how the hell do we get into football and chicken wings here?
I
think I must have been insane or something. Temporarily
insane. The whole first page is about the Buffalo Bills. It's 4 pages of economic writing, 3.5. This 1, 2, 3.5. Normally it's 4 full pages of money, inflation, quotes by Milton Friedman. But the whole first page is about the Buffalo Wings and about, well, it's that thing. Jeff, if you're from San Francisco and someone comes there and says, what's the temperature in Frisco? Oh, it's jarring. Same thing in the Cayman Islands. If someone says, how are the Caymans? Oh,
like nails on a chalkboard, right?
And I learned that there's something very, very similar in Buffalo when it comes to chicken wings and buffalo wings, as I refer to them. Tell me, what am I doing wrong?
Well, as everybody knows or should know, the current incarnation of chicken wings that people eat by the millions was invented and perfected at a place called the Anchor Bar in Buffalo, and it's a nice little spot even today. It's sort of nostalgic to go see where the chicken wing got its start. But you don't call them chicken wings, nor do you call them buffalo wings, because those are essentially tautologies. You just call them wings. They're just wings. No need to say chicken, no need to say buffalo. Those things go together.
Like inflation. Only an idiot would call it monetary inflation.
Yes. Well, you were giving it to me pretty bad in the previous segment. Yeah, and that's because I've been hitting you over the head with monetary inflation like buffalo wings. It just nails on a chalkboard.
Ladies and gentlemen, I promise this has something to do with economics, and we're going to learn about something called the National Chicken Council. And that there's a shortage of chicken and that prices of chickens are going up and blah, blah, blah. It's all going to be very fascinating. But Jeff, before we get into the meat of it, go ahead and let me know. I didn't catch the games this weekend. What happened? Anything important?
Well, I think there was a historic performance by the good guys, the Buffalo Bills in this case, who, just to give people a little bit of background, if they're not familiar with National Football League, American football, as well as the particular with this one team in Western New York, they had been tormented over a 2-decade-long period by this team in New England, or at least calling itself New England, really Boston, where essentially, I believe, wasn't it the Bills had beaten the Patriots 5 out of something like 30 times in that one stretch? So, I mean, it was utter sheer domination. The Patriots had tormented Buffalo Bills fans for a very long time, such that many of our kids had grown up never knowing anything good about their football team. As unfortunate as that might be, up until recently. Suddenly a quarterback arrives. Who knew you needed a quarterback, right? Suddenly a quarterback arrives. He turns out to be pretty good. Their quarterback had left. Tom Brady goes to another place and wins the Super Bowl with another team. Suddenly, a complete reversal of fortunes, where now the Bills are on the upswing. The Patriots are on the downswing, except in the earlier part of this year in a snow hurricane in Buffalo. The Patriots managed to squeak out a very weird win where their quarterback threw the ball all of 3 times in the entire game, as if this was the 1920s all over again. Yet the Patriots seem to wrest control. And if you can understand why Buffalo Bills fans, after this 20-year period, suddenly this spasm of worry, this battered Buffalo fan syndrome started to creep in, whereas, oh my God, the Bills, this is the Bills' time. This is Buffalo's time. And all of a sudden the Patriots are going to beat us and win the division again, as if this is all a recurring nightmare that we're going to experience. And that set up the season finale, or the penultimate season finale, where rematch number 1 with the Patriots before then meeting again in the playoffs this past weekend, which everybody around Western New York, or a fair number of people around Buffalo, were in unusual trepidation about Bill Belichick. He's going to come up with some genius plan It's going to thwart all of our best dreams and hopes. And boy, the Patriots are going to win again, and we're going to have to experience the same sort of torment and loss that we have over the last 20 years. And oh, by the way, there aren't any chicken wings. And I just said chicken wings. And I started calling buffalo wings and chicken wings. So it seemed as if everything that was going right, now the world is all early December. It seems like it all could just fall apart in all the worst possible ways.
What about the perfect game? We're going to get into the economics, but Jeff, come on. What about the perfect game? There's also that.
Spoiler alert, let's fast forward what actually happened. The Bills beat the Patriots not once, but twice in a row. First to win the division at the end of the regular season in a game in which they never punted once. And then the playoff game last Saturday, which they trounced the Patriots in a very satisfying fashion in a way that has never happened before in the entirety of NFL history, which is the team never once kicked. They didn't punt. They didn't turn it over. They didn't even get sacked or lose yards on any play, and instead scored a touchdown. And every single time they had the ball, save the final kneel downs at the end. So yes, it was great. It was fantastic.
Buffalo was actually involved in another somewhat no-kick game, or almost perfect game, kind of, in a sense. In 1992, 1993, when they played the 49ers, they went to San Francisco, and that was the first time in NFL history that neither team punted.
Neither team, yes.
And you remember, both those teams were fantastic, so it was an absolute light show. I loved that game. I still remember it. And here we are again, Buffalo involved in a very neat, perfect offensive explosion, one for the ages. Fantastic.
And thankfully, there were enough wings to go around the country. There was no wing shortage, so we were able to enjoy our victory in the only way that's fitting, which is a huge, humongous pile of especially hot wings.
Now, so there was a shortage late last year in December.
Yes,
McDonald's,
that was not made up.
Kentucky Fried Chicken, Tyson's, Costco, Publix, all of them announced some sort of reduction in the availability of chicken tenders. But according to the National Chicken Council, which only ranks below the FBI in importance in American society, the National Chicken Council, they said there are trucking challenges that are affecting most other industries. And quote, in the face of all these supply chain challenges, chicken production will actually be up this year. So that was fascinating. It wasn't a shortage, it was a supply chain thing. Jeff, you note that last December, the price of a chicken breast tender went to $3.98 from an already $3.
That was another thing that was sort of, there is a benchmark chicken tender breast meat chicken tender, which I didn't know either.
Oh, I know about it. I'm triple levered. The benchmark chicken tender
benchmark
index.
That's the next major product. I'm like, forget Dogecoin and all these meme coins. Chicken breast or breast meat tender benchmark futures. That's where the money's going to be at.
This is truly a potpourri show. Okay, so but you know what, Jeff? Why? Go ahead.
As the National Chicken Council said, don't blame us. This is not our fault. We have the chickens. They're there. In fact, we have more chickens last year than we had the year before. So the prices have gone up, not because there aren't chickens, is because it's so much more difficult and inefficient to move chicken where it needs to go, causing all of these regional problems as well as product problems. So in early December, when we had this possibility of a chicken wing shortage, it was not because there weren't chickens. It was because supply has become very inelastic for regional and temporary seasonal demand. And there's just not the same fluid situation in terms of moving goods around all across the supply chain across the country that allows stores to be stocked fully all the time.
Jeff, I suspect that you're using this small example as an analogy, as a metaphor for the wider problem in the global economy.
You figured it out.
Are you saying that Kuroda, Lagarde, and Powell had nothing to do with the increase in chicken breast prices? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's unequivocal. I mean, the fact that there actually was a chicken tender and chicken wing shortage in December is a perfect encapsulation, demonstration, illustration of that fact. Prices are not being caused by money printing, the money printer go burr thing. They're not being caused by, economic factors. They're being caused by these non-economic impositions, which have created supply shocks and shortages. They have nothing to do with the monetary system whatsoever. So it's not necessarily inflation. It's not inflation at all. consumer prices are adjusting in economic ways to non-economic problems.
I'm going to read a quote here by U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
I think it's Buttigieg Edge.
I'm not sure.
Boot edge.
Quote, there's no question that when you have a scarcity of access to shipping, you're going to see upward pressure on prices. Apparently, he didn't get the memo from the Fed. Okay. And that's going to be part of our challenge when it comes to inflation. Jeff, didn't Milton Friedman say that inflation is always and everywhere a railroad, cargo containers, and truckers phenomenon?
I think he said that. I think he said that in the 50s before revising himself in the 60s and saying it was a monetary phenomenon. But as you know, I mean, people complain about our show all the time, or at least complain about me all the time, because I insist on using the textbook definition of inflation as defined by Friedman, when as the transportation secretary, Pete, there used the term inflation as I think most people around the world do, certainly in the mainstream do, which is they think it's interchangeable with any time consumer prices rise for any reason. And I think that's wrong, because the reason it's wrong is because by doing so, by making this inflation term interchangeable, it destroys our ability to answer the question of where does it come from? What is the reason for it? If it's actual inflation, monetary inflation, to use your term, which I still hate, nails on the chalkboard, that means something very different than if it's because we can't get truckers to go to the port of Long Beach because they don't want to wait in long lines because they get paid by a single load rather than by the hour. That's a very different thing with very different set of implications, as well as cause and effect.
You quoted a friend of the show, John Dysart of the Financial Times, perhaps anecdotal, but somebody who's in the industry, an expert, who said, this is what Dysart is saying, quote, Lars Jensen, a container specialist with Vespucci Maritime in Copenhagen, did very well during the pandemic. I caught him in Kenya just as he was disconnecting from the grid for a long anticipated safari. Sounds so romantic to be a British journalist of finance, or at least living in Britain, at least writing for a British paper in Paris.
Yes, he's in Paris, France, writing for the London Financial Times, talking to a guy going on safari in Africa.
Yes. My point stands, romantic.
You're right.
What
this
a charmed life.
This is a real potpourri of a show.
Quote, here's what Mr. Jensen said, the container expert specialist. I would agree with you that it's over. What was he saying that it's over? The supply chain imbalances and
at least the upward slope of it. The massive pressures that in the container business caused container prices to skyrocket from around $2,000 per 40-foot container to around $10,000 per container. That's the global benchmark by the peak last summer. And on the specific East Asia, China to US West Coast routes, container prices went from about $2,000, a little bit less, in the summer of 2020 to the summer of 2021, where they were $18,000. And by September 2021, we're over $20,000 per container. The expert that Mr. Dysart was quoting was saying was like, yeah, that upswing, that's probably over. We've seen the best days. That doesn't mean everything just goes right back to normal, but it means things are starting to be worked out. We're starting to see the downside of the supply chain issues. And yes, it's an incredible mess. It still is, and it's causing headaches, obviously, when we have a December 2021 chicken shortage. So it's still not completely sorted out, but all of that craziness is maybe behind us.
If I had known about that chicken shortage, I would have done something about it, because here in the Cayman Islands, there's chickens everywhere. They're just walking around down the street. Yes. It's perfectly normal on the sidewalks. Man, I could have made so much money, but I was already long the chicken tender index. Jeff, the article is called "The PBOC is Doing the Opposite of the Federal Reserve." I guess all of this leads up to us saying supply chain demand imbalances causing price increases, not monetary inflation. Federal Reserve, you don't get it. You're raising rates for marketing, publicity, narrative purposes. Meanwhile, the PBOC is doing the opposite. What are they doing?
Which the Chinese, you remember, are on the other side of all of this, which is they're the ones making all the goods, trying to stuff it into the supply chain, including containers, because that was one of their short-sighted solutions out of expedience, which was if we can't get our hold of containers because they're so hard to get, and they get stuck in the United States, They just started making them. They just started making them by the hundreds of thousands because it was economical to do so at these prices. And that only made things worse because what ended up happening is during the COVID crisis and port problems, especially in the West Coast, empty containers just piled up at the ports. They didn't get put back onto boats and shipped back to China to be reused and come back here. It just became a one-way conveyor or a one-way mess where the just-in-time situation just completely broke down, specifically with containers, but also the wider logistical change, railroads, and there's a bottleneck in Chicago that I don't think has been worked out yet. There are East Coast port issues too. But your point that you just made, Emil, is exactly what we're trying to get at here, which is, what is the Fed doing? The Fed is saying we need to be hawkish because they believe that the supply chain issues are going to stick around maybe a little bit longer, or maybe they've stuck around already too much, and that consumers are going to acclimatize to these high levels of CPI, and therefore expectations are going to change. Even though, as we talked about in a previous episode, there's absolutely no evidence anywhere in the historical record that inflation expectations play any role in inflation whatsoever. But the Fed, because it doesn't do money, has to rely on something. So they're saying maybe people are going to normalize to high CPIs. We better start hiking rates and doing all of these hawkish policies. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the planet, over in China, where this economic stuff actually begins, the supply chain issues as well as the production of goods and material, the Chinese are doing the exact opposite. They are lowering interest rates because they are very concerned about the economic shape of not just China, but the global economy as a whole. China has its own problems in the real estate sector, obviously, but if the global economy and the trade of goods, especially the one-way trade of goods to the United States, starts to slow down too, you might imagine why the PBOC is taking a very different approach to 2022 than Jay Powell and the Fed. So what the PBOC has done, starting in December, it cut the RRR rate, which we've already talked about. That was the second cut. That's a warning sign. And then they cut something called the loan prime rate for the first time in December. And then this week, they cut it again, along with a reduction in the rate for the medium-term financing or MLF window, which shows that the PBOC is starting to get a little bit itchy because communist authorities over there have said it looks like economic growth has gone outside of our tolerances or maybe in danger of going to the downside outside of our tolerances. And we need to start fine-tuning in the opposite way of what everybody's thinking in the West.
If only the Federal Reserve had someone on staff who had written a paper in September of 2021 that questioned inflation expectations and their importance in policy-making decisions, maybe they wouldn't be making this what will almost certainly be another policy mistake of raising rates, only to have to fall backwards in, I don't know how many months or years, soon enough. Of course, I'm joking, ladies and gentlemen. Jeremy B. Rudd, September 2021. Why do we think that inflation expectations matter for inflation? And should we? Jeff, anything else from this article or anything in this last week that you wanted to bring up before we wrap up the show?
Just wrapping the entire segment or the entire show together with the previous two segments, what we're really saying here is that supply chain issues, CPI, the Fed is hiking rates because they think of this expectations policy when, in terms of the yield curve, in terms of the inverted Eurodollar futures curve, the markets are saying we're more worried like China than we are worried about inflation like the United States. So that's the conflict of interest rates of the yield curve as well as the Eurodollar futures curve, which is the Fed making the same mistake it always makes, which is overestimating economic strength, overestimating inflationary pressures because of its fundamental misunderstanding of the monetary condition as well as how to read the economic situation. So all of it together, we've got all of these weird things happening, but at the end of the day, we have the yield curve, we have the Eurodollar futures curve, we've got the bond market to help guide us in interpreting what's actually happening.
Well, I wish your team the best of luck this weekend. Sunday afternoon, right, Jeff, in Kansas City, Arrowhead, the site of last year's AFC championship game. Possibly the two best teams in the league. They'll be meeting in the semifinals. No, the quarterfinals. I wish you the best, Jeff. Are you going to watch it or?
Oh, absolutely. And hopefully there will be buffalo wings available.
And hopefully they're cheaper too. All right. Well, enjoy, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Emil. Take care.